Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. What's up, guys? Welcome to a special training camp preview episode of The Lager Line, brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. In today's show, we're going to be diving into storylines for the upcoming 2022 to 23 Houston Rockets training camp. Things really kick off on Monday, September 26th in Houston with Media Day. That's when we'll talk to General Manager Rafael Stone, head coach Stephen Silas, and a number of players. And then training camp itself starts on Tuesday, September 27th in Lake Charles, Louisiana. They'll be there for 3 days, come back to Houston on Friday, have another practice on Saturday, and then the home preseason opener is the following Sunday, October 2nd, against the San Antonio Spurs. So there's a lot to discuss. The season is approaching very quickly in terms of this show, The Lager Line, where we explore everything related to the Houston Rockets. We're going to be back to our usual interview format in the weeks ahead. We get to hear from a lot of these guys during training camp, during the preseason. We've also got some special guests lined up when it comes to other areas of the organization as they get ready for this upcoming campaign. But this one is just going to be me looking at basically the final week of the off season and giving you guys my information and my intuition, I suppose, on what's really important over the next few weeks as the Rockets start gearing up for the upcoming season. And before we get into what I view as the 5 key storylines, there's so many, but I've narrowed it down to 5. I want to emphasize that these are storylines specifically for training camp and the preseason. This is not the biggest storylines for the Rockets and the overall season. That's very different, and I also view it as less interesting because so many of those are obvious, quite frankly. We want to see what Jalen Green does in his second NBA season. We want to see how good Jabari Smith is as a rookie. These are the 2 truly blue chip prospects of the organization. That's the most important thing. However, you're not going to be able to tell that much from the preseason, let alone training camp. Think back to this past season. If you had tried to grade Jalen Green even at the All-Star break, where 2/3 of the season was complete, your grade would have been very different than what it ultimately was in the offseason because, of course, the final 2 months of the season was when Jalen really had his breakout and that historic scoring stretch near the end of the season. That was the Jalen Green that pushed his way onto the all-rookie first team and has a lot of people envisioning an Anthony Edwards-type jump entering his second season. We do want to see that happen. There's a chance that it can. We want to see Jabari Smith make a Rookie of the Year push, but that's going to be something that you grade in a matter of months rather than weeks and many months in the cases of both of those young guys. It takes time with these types of young prospects. So this show, I'm talking about things that you should really watch for as you see clips from practices at training camp and then those 4 preseason games starting with Sunday, October 2nd against the Spurs, things that should stand out immediately. And I also want to emphasize that while certainly everything has a small sample size when we're talking about just a few weeks of practices and exhibition games, there are some things that are more tied to sample size than others. And I'm trying to steer this conversation away from those. For example, shooting. Jabari Smith, his biggest skill as a prospect, at least arguably, is how elite of a shooter he is for his size as a 6'10" athletic freak. And yet at Summer League over 5 games, he really didn't shoot that well. I'm not concerned about it. I think it's flukish, but it just reminds you that even the best shooters have a week or 2 here or there where they really struggle to shoot. And even poor shooters will have a week or 2 where they catch fire. It really takes closer to the full 82 game slate for some of those trends to even out. So I'm not going to focus for better or for worse on things like shooting in the preseason. I would also say the same for team defense, because first off, in terms of the practices, the Rockets were the worst team in the NBA last season, and they're even younger after trading Christian Wood in the offseason. So they're not going to be going up against the best competition. Even if they look good, let's wait to see what happens when they go up against the better teams in the league. Similarly, in the preseason, first off, a lot of teams aren't playing their full rotation, or at least at their full rotation minutes. And you're also integrating a lot of new players, not really opening up the playbook the way you would in games that actually count. So let's wait to really get excited based on defensive results, at least at the team level, until we see what happens against actual opponents when the games count. We know that's a big part of the evaluation for Stephen Silas. He brought in Lionel Hollins as one of his top assistants this offseason to shore up that side of the ball. You want to see growth. I think in the preseason, you can look individually. Certainly, you should see things like, for example, Jalen Green has talked a lot about building strength this offseason. I think in the preseason games, you can sort of tell, does he hold up better at the point of attack? Does he not get pushed away as easily when he's trying to defend on these drives? You can notice little things like that. But in terms of the overall unit and how they function together, that's going to take a larger sample size. So that's not really something that I'm looking too closely at in the preseason, at least not from a numerical perspective. And where does their defensive efficiency rank? Things like that. That's something that, to me, you need a much more broad sample size to evaluate. And while that's certainly true with everything, it's not fair to evaluate anybody based on just training camp or the preseason. There are some elements of basketball that are even more unfair. So I want to steer away from that in this conversation and focus on things that you can at least get a decent idea of, or some small idea based on what we see on the floor in the next couple of weeks, here in interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And I've got it down to 5 main themes, and no particular order, but if I did order it, this would be near the top. The biggest thing that I'm looking forward to when the Rockets report to media day and training camp next week, I want to see the swag and the confidence in Kevin Porter Jr.'s step. This is a massive year and a massive month for him, because as a first-round rookie from the 2019 class, if he's going to get a contract discussion, which we've discussed the pros and cons before on this show, the Logger Line, just check out our archives. There's legitimate arguments in both directions, and ultimately depend on what he's willing to accept, what the Rockets are willing to offer. Can they find a middle ground? Well, the deadline for those fourth-year players is the start of the regular season, which is mid-October. I believe October 19th is when the Rockets open their season this year. So we're less than a month away from that deadline, and this is the last chance he has to make an impression on Rafael Stone and the Rockets and make it clear that, hey, you should really consider investing in me now, because if you wait until after the season, while certainly the Rockets would still have restricted free agent rights on KPJ and be able to match outside offers, if he goes out there and has a true breakout season, then you could end up paying him a lot more money and have him at a much higher figure on your future books and take up much more of your cap room than if you did the deal now. And certainly there's incentive for him to go ahead and get that guarantee if he can get that. It's just a matter of whether the two sides can come together, because both would have to accept a small degree of risk. And it just comes down to whether there's a happy medium. And in terms of convincing the Rockets, it really starts with this month. And I guess it ends with the month. And if we're talking about the extension, because you can't do it after the start of the regular season. So KPJ needs to control what he can control. And when we consider some of the off-court issues that he's had in the past, I think having him ready to go from day one would be a really, really good start. In my opinion, based on everything I've heard, I think he is ready. He looked in phenomenal shape, had great things to say when we saw him last week at the Rockets 9/11 community event. I think he's taking more ownership in this team, which, if you think about it, there's a good chance that he ends up being the oldest player in terms of NBA experience in Houston's starting lineup. As crazy as that is to say, there's a damn good chance, because Jalen Green is younger. He's entering his second year. Jabari Smith is going to start. He's a rookie. Alperen Sengun is going to start, and he's a second-year player. All of those guys are 19 or 20 years old. And there's a decent shot that Jae'Sean Tate, who's entering his third NBA season, KPJ is entering his fourth, is that fifth starter. Now, it could be Eric Gordon. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I think in a perfect world, the Rockets would love to start Jae'Sean Tate. There's a reason they gave him that extension in the offseason. And if that's the case, look, KPJ is going to be your most experienced NBA player. And there should be some confidence, some swag that comes from that. I think when you look back at KPJ a year ago, it was sort of an uneven season. And a lot of it traces back to the fact that it was his first year as a full-time point guard. And there's a delicate balance when it comes to when to attack and when to facilitate and get the rest of his teammates going, especially veterans like Christian Wood, like Eric Gordon, like Dennis Schroeder. And in that sense, I don't think it's really a coincidence that KPJ took off the last 7 games of the season, because that's when the veterans were shut down. And you really saw KPJ get the ball in his hands more frequently, and he just felt more confident and looked more confident, quite frankly, in his own skin in terms of when do I attack, when do I get others involved. And there was less thinking, more just playing, more hooping, as I think he would say. And now that Christian Wood is gone, and we'll see if Eric Gordon even starts, Dennis Schroeder is gone, joining the Lakers, this should be, I don't want to say KPJ's team, but he should be up there. If he's not the best player, he should be really, really close. And entering year 4, that's the other part of this. Year 4 is when guys typically start to get closer to their peak. I'm not saying that who he is now, 22 years old in his 4th NBA season, is 100% this season going to be what he is moving forward, but you typically don't see an enormous leap in year 5 or later. If a guy is going to take that step forward, most of them at least start to do it in year 4. And of course, that's tied in with the contract structure. That's why it was collectively bargained that these guys typically get their first big deal after the 4th season, because that's when you get a sufficient enough sample size from a team perspective to feel confident in saying, hey, I have a good idea of what this player can or can't be in the future. So this is his 4th season. It's also his first full off season. You look back his last couple of years, 2 years ago, you had COVID, and then everything that was going on, the circus off the court in Cleveland. And then this past year, it was a shortened off season because the NBA was trying to get back from its COVID calendar to the normal league year from October to April, the regular season that it's back on now. So it was abbreviated. This is the first full off season to really get his body right. His mind is in a good place. He's happy in Houston. He says that all the time. He wants to be here. So mentally, he's in the right place. He should have every incentive financially to be in the best shape of his life, to be ready to go from day 1 of training camp. And he's going to be one of the most talented players and one of the most experienced in that starting lineup when camp opens next Tuesday. You put all of that together, he should walk with a sense of confidence, with a swagger. He should feel like this is my team. He should go out there and be the guy. Not saying he's going to be 27, 8, and 7 necessarily, although we should point out that it wasn't like he just accomplished those numbers by volume scoring since the veterans weren't out there. No, he was very efficient in doing so as well. So I really think some of that can be traced back to the fact that he was just more comfortable in his own skin playing with the other young guys at the end of the year. And this season's team is even younger. He's a year older. You add all of these factors together, he should feel like that this is his team. He should be aggressive. He should be confident. And what really separates the good to very good players in the NBA from the average ones is that they're able to make their talent more consistent. Everybody has flashes from time to time. And we've seen it from Kevin Porter Jr. the last couple of years, his 2nd and 3rd in the NBA, his first 2 in Houston. We all remember the 50 and 10 game against the Milwaukee Bucks. But then he also has had his share of 6-point games with 5 turnovers where he shoots 2 of 10 from the field. What separates the good to very good from the average tier is their ability to bring it every single night. The mental focus to stay dialed in, even when things don't necessarily start well for you in the first quarter of a game or even the first quarter of a season, because slumps happen. We talked about that with sample size. To keep pushing. A lot of times that naturally happens as a player gets older, but sometimes, quite frankly, players just aren't able to find that consistency for one reason or another, be it some sort of talent deficiency or just the mental side of it. It is a challenge, and I think people are going to be watching Kevin Porter Jr. even more closely based on his history and some of the off-court concerns. So I think going into this season, certainly in shape, you want to see everybody in good shape, but that's obvious. I think having the right approach, feeling like that it is his team and going on the floor with a confidence and a swagger next week to go out and make a point that I am ready to run the show. Last year was something of an experiment, and there were plenty of ups and downs. I think, certainly his first year as a point guard, and that was sort of mixed results. I think it didn't help that early in the year he had the quad injury from Draymond Green getting him early November, and really he struggled with that for half the season until he finally put that behind him. So hopefully he's simply healthier, but he was better as a three-point shooter, much better, shot 38% on high volume. His catch and shoot numbers 99th percentile in the NBA. So there's clearly a player there. There's a reason he was a first round draft pick, even with some of the character concerns. And you look at a guy who's 6'6", can shoot at a high level from three, has quality instincts, has the length to be disruptive defensively and guard multiple positions. Whether he's a true NBA point guard remains to be seen. That's still something of an experiment, year two of the post John Wall era. But at a bare minimum, a guy with that type of height, athleticism, versatility, and shooting is certainly an NBA rotation player if his mind is in the right place. I think it is. And especially in the context of a team this young, I know he's just 22 years old, but he should be a leader in a lot of ways. He's probably going to have the most NBA experience in the starting lineup. And he plays a position as the point guard, as the guy with the ball in his hands, the facilitator, in which you really want to see leaders. And I think it's up to him to step up and embrace that. It was a lot to ask a year ago because so much of it, really, it was basically, it felt like his second NBA season because that prior COVID season was so disjointed for him with what happened, especially off the court in Cleveland, and then moving teams, spending a month in the G League as the Rockets slowly acclimated him back into an NBA lifestyle. But at this point, no more excuses. This is year four. He has every financial incentive to be ready to go, and the Rockets have every basketball incentive to give him the keys and say, hey, we'll go as far as you can take us. And while you shouldn't overreact to things like how well he shoots or doesn't in the preseason, again, it's a small sample, and some of these guys aren't going to be going all out. You simply, above all else, you want to avoid getting hurt in the preseason. And that's especially the case for KPJ trying to make his case for a contract before the year. But I do think you can tell a lot from attitude. And that's what I want to see from KPJ starting next week. So far, so good. But again, you can only tell so much until you start seeing 5-on-5 activity in practice and then in exhibition games. And I think I want to see a more confident, a more vocal, a more authoritative Kevin Porter Jr., especially now that he's the veteran. There's fewer mouths to feed in terms of veterans that might make him a little bit apprehensive about where he fits in the grand scheme. This is his team, and I want to see him basically act like it is. I don't want to say it's number one because I think all of these five storylines are important, but it's up there. It's really important. I think with the other young guys, Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith, year one, year two, there's going to be a lot of volatility. And even if some of these guys have down stretches, that's to be expected. Year four, not saying there's never going to be any down stretches, but you are closer to reaching a point in which, hey, the player that Kevin Porter Jr. is this season, that's close to who you can reasonably expect him to be moving forward. Not saying that you can't expect some growth moving forward, but you probably can't expect a massive jump from year four to year five or year five to year six. The big jumps tend to happen between year two and year three and year three and year four. And maybe KPJ stunned it a little bit because of some of the off-court issues and COVID. Regardless, though, this is the time, if he's going to put it together, be more consistent and be not just a solid NBA player, but a very good starter or maybe even a star. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I think he believes the talent is there. And I've talked to people in the Rockets that believe that as well. If that's going to happen, and that's the player you might want to invest proactively in with an extension, you should see it at least in some of the intangibles immediately upon reporting to media day and training camp. And I hope he takes advantage. Now, let's go to the other storylines, and I'll go a little bit quicker. I wanted to spend more time talking about KPJ because I think that one is fairly layered. Another storyline I'm watching that does relate to KPJ, but also to Jalen Green, and this is going to be much more X's and O's, basketball focused. I spent much of the last 10 minutes or so talking about KPJ and the intangibles. This is going to be much more about on-court nuance. And while I think they struggled for different reasons, the similar priority this offseason for Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, or one of them at least, is on finishing near the rim. With KPJ, I think he wanted to get stronger, but it's not as cut and dried as it is with Jalen. A year ago, we all know what Jalen Green was. He was simply rail thin as a 19-year-old kid, and he's talked about building a lot of muscle this offseason. 8 pounds, I believe, is what I read recently. He does look stronger in the photos. It's up to him to show it, and hopefully that can help him hold his balance more on his drives and be able to finish on some of those rim runs the way that he couldn't a year ago, because if he can, that's going to open up the three-point shot for him even more once guys really have to respect his ability to beat them off the dribble and finish inside, even if there's a big that comes over to help. With KPJ, it's interesting because I mentioned the big step he had as a shooter last year. And you think about that, and it's easy to wonder, well, why didn't his overall stats improve a lot if he got so much better as a shooter, which we all know in today's pace and space NBA is so important relative to his first couple of seasons, specifically the previous year in Houston. And it's because, and he acknowledged this when last season ended, the media day exit interviews, if you will, after last season ended, it's because as his shooting improved, his finishing got worse. And there's a number of reasons for that. I mentioned, or plausible reasons. I mentioned the quad injury that Draymond gave him early in the season. Maybe he wasn't healthy, comfortable, really pushing off and exploding. Some of it could be just bad luck. Some of it could be, I don't know, getting your footwork out of whack and not being comfortable jumping off the right leg or in the right spot. And that could be traced back to the injuries as well. There's a lot of things. The bottom line is that he just simply did not finish as well as he did in year one and year two. And if he can get back to that level and you can combine that with the jump he had as a shooter, that's where there's something really special that you can potentially unlock in Kevin Porter Jr. And of course, we talk about it a lot with Jalen Green because we know how explosive he is as a scorer and as an athlete. But again, there's a reason why the Rockets are so invested in KPJ as well. Both of them, especially towards the end of last season, showed enormous potential as shooters. The next step is going to be driving to the basket. Can they finish through contact? That starts with being stronger, being able to maintain your balance, your technique. Also, some of it comes down to emphasizing, I think, the floater game a little bit. Look how Chris Paul operates. Certainly, they have a lot more athleticism than an older Chris Paul, but look at how he succeeds as someone that doesn't even have their advantages of size and athleticism. And a lot of it's because that teardrop game, that ability to finish before the big can fully get to you and perhaps knock you off balance or push your shot in a different direction, force you to put more arc on it, which makes you more likely as a small player to miss. Can you get off that shot in the 4, 5, 6 range and focus on the technique? I think for NBA players, there's so many things that you have to work on in a given offseason. It's very possible that maybe a year ago, both of those guys didn't have that near the top of their list when it comes to priorities. And of course, with Jalen, he was just so young, a shortened offseason anyway. I think he was just worried about conditioning, and keep in mind he had the hamstring injury too. This year, they've been relatively healthy. They've had a full offseason. They know this is a weakness that they need to get better at. KPJ in particular has stated it. It's something that's going to be huge when it comes to the overall success of their seasons. And I do think that you can see small elements of whether it's there in training camp and the preseason. Certainly, there's some luck when it comes to a floater rolling off or not finishing through contact. Okay, that's going to happen to anybody from time to time. But you can tell whether they are strong enough to hold their balance. You can tell whether their footwork is in sync and they're going off the right foot or timing it correctly. The results may not always be there, but you should be able to tell early on if those guys are in a better position to finish on those drives than they were a year ago. If they are, That is crucial because I think especially early in the season, teams are going to close out on those guys on the three-point line hard. Everybody knows how the Rockets finished this past season, and so it's going to be incumbent upon them to attack those closeouts, to go inside, and if they can't get straight to the rim, then can they finish with the teardrop, even an occasional mid-range shot? You've got to unlock the full scoring arsenal to get to where they want to go, to be able to make defenses respect you on multiple levels. And I think for both those guys, it starts with finishing, and it ties in with Jalen in particular. We've heard about him wanting to build strength this offseason, and finishing isn't the only area you'll see it. I mentioned earlier, you want to see him stronger at the point of attack on defense. You want to see him, Stephen Silas pointed out one of his offseason interviews, a bit more stable with his balance on long three-point shots, talking especially the 25-foot and beyond ones, the Eric Gordon specialty, if you will. One reason Eric Gordon's able to be so successful at that distance is because of how strong he is, especially in his lower body. And I think that's something that you want to see. Not that Jalen's going to be anywhere near Eric Gordon in strength in year two. That's unrealistic. You don't want guys to put on too much weight too quickly or they're going to lose their athleticism. But again, just little things. Can they hold up better than they were a year ago when defenders, be it on their own team or in exhibition games, start to bump them, try to make contact, and it gets a little bit more physical? You can see some of that in the preseason. Even if it's too early to judge the results, that is something that I think that you can see fairly quickly if the progress is there, and at least to an extent, how much. Now, in terms of on-court elements, another thing to watch when it comes to, everyone, but especially the backcourt of Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. How do the Rockets function with Alperen Sengun as a hub? Not going to say the hub. That's way too much pressure to put on a 20-year-old kid in his second NBA season. Let's not act like that you're going to run your entire offense through him like he's Nikola Jokic. That's very unfair. And Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green are going to operate with the ball in their hands a lot, the same way they did this past season. However, I do think it's worth noting that even though Alperen Sengun, probably not day one as good of a player as Christian Wood was a year ago, he is someone that needs the ball in his hands more to be effective. Christian Wood, for all of his strengths, offensively, he was predominantly an elite shooter and someone that you could trust in the pick and roll game and pick and pop. He is not someone that you really ask to create offense either for himself in isolation or for his teammates by driving and kicking. Not saying he never did it, but that's just not really his game. For Alperen Sengun, it is. He can be a dazzling passer. You can operate with him out of the high post, even beyond the three-point arc. You can operate with him in the mid-range, on the low block. You can run offense through him for stretches. And that's going to be a change this upcoming season, both for him and for the players around him. For Sengun, last season, when he came off the bench, he largely was the offense is in those minutes. Either he wasn't playing with Kevin Porter Jr. and or Jalen Green, or if one of those was out there, it was one, not both, and they might have been a little bit winded because, of course, they'd already played at least 10 to 12 minutes of basketball in each half by the time All-P got out there. This year, playing with them, it's not as if you go down the floor and expect to run your offense through Alperen Sengun every possession the way you did many times when he was sort of your sixth man last year. So he's going to have to get used to not having the ball in his hands quite as much and trying to make an impact away from the ball. And what can he do? Not really as a traditional floor spacer, but at least in terms of where he can drag his defender, how he can set screens, and basically how he can hopefully make life easier for his teammates. It's not all going to be about what happens when All-P has the ball in his hands. Similarly, though, for KPJ and Jalen Green, they are not going to run the show quite to the extent that they did a year ago, in which, again, Christian Wood was not really a creator. He was looking for shots that they were often creating, the drive and kick established by KPJ or Jalen. No, you are going to have more possessions run through Alperen Sengun than you did Christian Wood, simply because so much of Sengun's value is based on the idea that he can command a double team and pass to a cutter or an open shooter or do something dribbling the ball. I mean, we saw that at Eurobasket this month. I mean, he will floor you at times with some of the things, even as a 6'9" heavy post player, that he can do with the ball in his hands, even just trying to create one-on-one, not just in the post, but face up. Alperen Sengun is a very creative player. He is a good passer. Well, guess what? You need the ball in your hands to do those things. And for KPJ and Jalen, that is going to be a change relative to last season with Christian Wood. So for them, I'm not saying that you should judge the results because I think it's going to be fairly uneven. But what I do think that you should want to see is a willingness to try the effort. And it's for KPJ and Jalen. It's also for Sengun. When the ball isn't in your hands on a given possession and somebody else is the primary creator, what are you doing to try to create value? Is it making more cuts? Is it trying to find your spot in the corner or wherever you need to drag your defender to try and open up the floor more for whoever it is that has the ball? Is it setting the screen in the right spot? Is it communication and trying to bark out signals? There's so many ways that you can impact the game without the ball in your hands. And yet these guys are very young in the NBA, and largely to this point, they've operated with the ball. And I understand why. The Rockets are a very young rebuilding team, and you want to see these guys get touches. But now you're putting all three of these high usage players in the same starting lineup. It's going to be a little bit different, even relative to when it was KPJ, Jalen, and Christian Wood as the predominant three, at least in terms of shot takers and to an extent creators a year ago. There is going to have to be some sacrifice made. I don't pretend that it's going to be easy. It may look rusty. It may take weeks, if not months, to get this thing fully humming. But what I do think that you should see in the preseason, not the results, if they look a little bit out of sync, fine. Even though they spend a lot of time together in the offseason, look, intra-squad games are one thing, but going up against other more veteran-laden NBA teams, that's night and day different. So I'm not saying that you should expect the results to be there, that you should just have this laser-like efficiency. No, especially not with a team this young. But you should see a willingness to try. Even if they're uncomfortable, keep trying new things. Don't sulk. Don't pout when you don't get the ball on a given trip. That's something that I think certainly it's a bit of a challenge for Stephen Silas as well. We'll talk about him in a few minutes. But I think especially for those young guys, and it's not the first year for any of them. Jabari Smith, I think the Rockets really want him in his rookie season to sort of compartmentalize, focus on his strengths with regards to clearly his defensive versatility, his long-range shooting, everything else. We know what the hurdles are with Jabari, especially in terms of his strength, his body. He's just 19 years old, one of the youngest prospects in the entire draft. It's going to take time. I think they want him to just focus on simply getting used to the rigors of NBA lifestyle and focus on the strength that he has. For the others that have played at least a year, in the case of Jalen and Sengun, and in the case of KPJ going into year 4, they've got more experience. So you do want to see them unlocking more layers to their game, more depth. And so in this case, it's going to be new. Sengun playing with 2 high usage guards, with the case of KPJ and Jalen playing with a more high usage center. How do they respond to that? And do they not let it affect their effort off ball or defensively? Basically, do they stay engaged? That's something that I think you can see in the preseason in training camp. Just that willingness to try, that effort, staying in the right mindset. That's the kind of thing that I think you can look for in the preseason. Now, as we wind down, rotation battles. I think clearly we know there's a battle at point guard, or backup point guard that is, between Daishen Nix and Ty Washington. Nick's probably the favorite because he's in his second year, Ty going into his rookie season, so it makes more sense, assuming all things are equal, to send Ty to Rio Grande Valley and play a lot in the G League year 1, but I think he'll be given a shot. With Daishen, honestly, I think the biggest thing for him is just shooting better from the free throw line. He improved his three-point shooting a lot last year. We know he has the vision, the leadership, some of the old school qualities. We saw that at Summer League. I think the biggest thing for him is just shooting better on free throws, so he gets more confident in his drives, because he needs to be able to drive to the basket, finish some, and suck the defense in to sort of be able to open up the drive and kick game, to get open shots to the guards that he plays with and the shooters, which is when a traditional point guard like Daishen Nix can be at his most effective. If he's tentative because he doesn't trust his ability to make free throws when he gets fouled on drives, then all of a sudden the fact that he's not really that explosive is a bit more of an inhibiting factor. And if that's the case, then I do think Ty is much more explosive overall in terms of his ability as well, certainly his athleticism, but just overall his offensive game, his ability to sort of create his own offense, be it a jump shot or especially just one-on-one play, beating guys off the dribble. I think he's not quite the old school that Daishen Nix is, but he is a bit more explosive. And if Daishen doesn't trust his ability to finish inside or convert free throws when he tries to finish inside, then that may open up an opportunity for a guy in Ty that's just so explosive athletically and can do some things in one-on-one play that I don't think that Daishen can, and talking comparatively. So my guess is that Daishen is the favorite because he has more experience. He did play well with the Vipers last season, but it's got to translate. In Summer League is a bit of a mixed bag. I think training camp, they'll give Daishen every opportunity if it's up to him to take advantage. My bet is that it will be Daishen, but I won't say that it's a lock. I do think Ty will have a legitimate chance to make a push there. And similarly, backup center, you've seen the Rockets sign so many or agree to sign. They still haven't made the Willie Cauley-Stein deal official yet. My guess is that they want to exhaust all trade possibilities with those veterans they acquired from Dallas in the Christian Wood trade, Marquise Chris, Trey Burke, Sterling Brown, before releasing them. But I think clearly Willie Cauley-Stein will be signed as soon as they have an open roster spot. And so you've brought in Cauley-Stein, Bruno Fernando. You've got Usman Garuba, who's entering his second season. You've got Boban, the one player obtained in the Wood trade from Dallas that is going to stick. And so you've got all these names as your backup center. But look, entering his second season, this needs to be Usman Garuba's job. He's healthy. He's in good shape. We just saw him play a very important role for the Spain team that unexpectedly won Eurobasket, not just as a defender, but as a facilitator as well. Made some really good passes throughout that tournament. And let's be honest, we know who guys like Bruno Fernando, Boban, Willie Cauley-Stein, we know who they are. They are not long-term pieces when the Rockets are next trying to build a contender by 2024 or 2025 to get into at least playoff mode, let's say. Those guys are probably not going to be on the team at that point. Usman Garuba, as a first-round pick from 2021, he easily could be. And the bottom line is he has no excuses. He's healthy. He's should be confident coming off the run at Eurobasket. And the competition at backup center, the bar is really low. The key to remember with this is that if it's at all close, the Rockets will go with Garuba if it's anything close to a tie, simply because he has more upside. They need to evaluate him on an NBA floor because guess what? The Rockets, we all know this, they have so much cap room next summer, perhaps $70 million. Well, some of these guys in the current rotation are going to get bumped out a year from now by guys the Rockets sign with all or some of that money. I don't know if they're going to spend all of it. They're definitely going to spend a decent bit of it as they try to get better by next season at the latest, because, of course, 2023 to 2024, that season's when the future draft pick obligations to Oklahoma City come back into play. So the Rockets are going to be making signings in some capacity, and they're going to be looking at this rotation this year. What are guys that I really don't trust long term? And if Usman Garuba, even coming off a strong Eurobasket run against a lot of NBA players, and with a clear advantage in terms of investment, the Rockets clearly see him as much more of a potential future piece than anyone in the Boban, Bruno, Cauley-Stein tier. If it's close, they are going to give that job to Usman Garuba. The only way he doesn't get it relative to those other names is if he is severely outplayed. And if he is severely outplayed by someone in that tier, even coming off a strong Eurobasket, and when we know he's healthy, that was the story, or a lot of it a year ago, he just wasn't healthy very much, that should set off a red flag, even in year two. That would be alarming. Now, I'm not going to say that Garuba has to be in the rotation. I do think there's a small chance where maybe you see some small ball minutes with Jabari Smith at the 5 to try and play someone like Tari Eason, fellow rookie out of LSU, perhaps KJ Martin a bit more. And so if that's the case, if Garuba doesn't play every night because you're trying to play a bit smaller, and so maybe there isn't a true backup to Alperen Sengun, you just sort of see Jabari slide over for certain stretches. Okay, I guess you can live with that because at least he's losing minutes to another prospect. If Usman Garuba loses minutes to a guy who isn't even a prospect on a rebuilding team that is all about the future in a season that's all about development, that's alarming. So my guess is that at center, Usman Garuba either wins the job or they don't really have a backup center. But if Usman Garuba loses that job because someone in that Bruno, Boban, or Willie Cauley-Stein tier severely outplays him, even in year 2, when you consider the context in terms of coming off of Eurobasket, he's in shape. He should be even more in basketball shape than everybody else because he's been playing for the past month. And of course, he knows what a big year it is for him. He said that in all of his interviews, and we all know the Rockets in their cap room next summer. Yes, if Garuba does not hold off those veteran types, that's a red flag. So that's an important rotation battle to watch. But then overall, I think when you look at so many of the rest of the battles, we can talk about the 5th starter mentioned earlier, Eric Gordon or Jae'Sean Tate. We can also talk about, as we get down the rotation and you look at the guys that are going to play. We know the top 6: Jabari, Jalen, KPJ, Sengun, Tate, and Gordon. We know Josh Christopher's going to play. We know, at least for 10 minutes a game, probably there's going to be a backup point guard. You're at 8 now, and let's say you do have Usman Garuba as your backup center. Okay, you're already at 9. So I think 10 is really, the deepest rotation you can have in the regular season. And we're talking about a scenario where everyone is healthy. Of course, that's not always the case, but let's be optimistic. People are healthy going into training camp in the preseason, so it's something to watch for. We had not even talked about Garrison Matthews, Tari Eason, or KJ Martin when filling out our potential Rockets rotation. So there is going to be a crunch at some point. And of course, you can get creative. Again, I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily have to have a backup center in every game or a backup point guard. You could have Josh Christopher or Eric Gordon as a quasi backup at the 1. You could have Jabari Smith sliding over and playing, Jabari at the 5, and then a Tari Eason type or KJ Martin sliding in to the 4 minutes. So there are some other things that you can do. But the point is, there are a lot of bodies that are hoping to play. Spoiler alert, not all of them actually are. And so beyond just the obvious position crunch, those guys at the 5 and Jae'Sean and Tai when it comes to the backup point guard spot, the common theme that I see in the other battles, for me, it comes down to the stability of shooters versus the upside of defenders and athletes. And even though, for example, Eric Gordon and Jae'Sean Tate are both going to be in the rotation, no matter what, and playing at least 25 minutes a game, although we may see Eric Gordon take back-to-backs off the way he did last year, so that'll allow you to be a little bit more flexible. I think it's clear that in a perfect world, the Rockets would love to start Jae'Sean Tate over Eric Gordon. He's younger. They gave him an extension in the offseason. He's better defensively. He just gives you more flexibility in a lot of the things that you can do, but especially in the defensive end, which Stephen Silas has stressed over and over again, is a priority. And especially on a Rockets team that's going to be so young, especially in the starting lineup, Jalen, KPJ, Jabari, even though he's good defensively as a prospect, he's a rookie. Most rookies are bad defensively for a reason. The jump from college to the NBA is just so extreme. And then Alperen Sengun, they would love to have Jae'Sean Tate's defense out there. The bottom line is whether the Rockets can survive offensively. Because when we talk about the floor spacing, I know everybody is high on the idea that you've added Jabari Smith and the shooting is something that should translate immediately. But the reality is that in terms of your starting lineup and the floor spacing, while Jabari Smith at power forward is a better shooter than what you had a year ago, the reality is also that you lost a lot at center going from Christian Wood to Alperen Sengun as a shooter. So basically, it comes out a wash relative to a year ago in terms of your starting lineup, in that Jabari should be a really good shooter, yes, but you are also subtracting a really good shooter in Christian Wood. So a lineup with Tate and Sengun, it makes you better defensively, it makes you bigger, it makes you more athletic. I think the Rockets also love the idea of playing Tate and Sengun together. Stephen Silas mentioned this during the offseason, because when they play together, you can't hide the 5 on Tate. That's something the last couple of years we saw defenses really clog the Rockets by doing, put their center on Jae'Sean Tate, sag back, and dare him to shoot, knowing that he probably won't, or if he does, he's likely to miss it. And so the offense just got very sticky because many times it was like you were playing 4-on-5 because they weren't really guarding Tate from the perimeter. Now, Tate has talked about working on his jump shot this offseason, and he's seen some results, but no one's really going to buy into that until we see it in games and a lot more than just the preseason. Hopefully Tate takes a jump as a shooter, but that's something that you don't even want to begin really considering, in my opinion, until the midpoint of the season. Certainly not something to weight heavily in the preseason. I think right now you have to consider him as basically the same shooter, about 31% or so that he was from behind the arc the last couple of years, and that's not enough to force defenders to come out on him. And so especially if you can drop your big man, to protect the rim and really take away those driving lanes for guys like KPJ and Jalen, that's a problem. And the Rockets would love to address that by playing Tate and Sengun together, because you're not going to stick your 5 on Tate and drop him back and ask someone who is not a 5 to guard Alperen Sengun, because unlike Christian Wood, Alperen Sengun has enough sand in his pants to really take advantage of an undersized forward that's trying to guard him on the low block. So that's the upside to it. But the downside is that with Tate and Sengun together, you have 2 non-shooters that probably aren't going to be respected a lot. Now, maybe if Tate operates from the corners, and he did tell me a week ago at that 9/11 event that he's really focused on corner 3-point shooting, maybe that's a way that he can force at least some respect. It's a shorter 3-point line out in the corners a little bit, so maybe he can force defenders to come out to there. Maybe he can offset it with off-ball cuts. He is a good passer. It doesn't have to be floor spacing, and some of this is Stephen Silas finding the right ways to use these guys as well. But the bottom line, in the modern NBA, it is tough to play with multiple non-shooters at a time, especially when we talk about wanting to develop guys like KPJ and Jalen and Jabari. Well, that starts, especially offensively, with having the floor space, the ability to create their own shots and get better. And can they do that with Tate and Sengun on the floor at the same time? I hope they can, but it's far from a given. And that's what I think we'll start to see during training camp in the preseason. It's not so much what the results are in terms of do the shots go in. That can be pretty fluky. But what I do think that you can get a sense of is whether the space is there to operate, whether the other guys are comfortable with those guys on the floor. Because I think in a perfect world, they would start Tate. He's younger. He gives them more versatility, especially on defense, which is a huge point of emphasis for this young team. But it's just about whether you can, to add that, you can survive with the reduced shooting. Similarly, off the bench, we mentioned Garrison Matthews, Tari Eason, KJ Martin, those guys that are competing. It's a similar dynamic there. Certainly, the Rockets see more long-term value in Eason and KJ as prospects. That goes without saying. There's more upside there than with Garrison Matthews. But at the same time, if you don't have the shooting, and we're talking about the bench, neither Daishen Nix nor Josh Christopher is a particularly elite shooter. Can you survive without having a sufficient number of floor spacers? And that's where a guy like Garrison Matthews that can shoot a lot of threes at volume. I've also heard that he's bulked up some this offseason, so they think he's going to be a little bit better defensively. That may be something you have to consider because of what he does, not just as a player, but what he does for the other players on the court with him. And that's part of the equation that a lot of Rockets fans and NBA fans in general don't seem to get. When we talk about playing some of these veterans like Eric Gordon and Garrison Matthews, and Matthews, of course, is a lot younger than Gordon, but I'm going to call him a veteran in this sense because he's similar to Gordon in the sense that you sort of know who he is. There's not another layer to his game. It's not like a more explosive athlete like a KJ Martin or a Tari Eason that might become something better. You sort of know who Eric Gordon and Garrison Matthews are. And so a lot of fans say, especially for a young and rebuilding team, why are you going to play a guy like that when you can turn to this guy that has a lot more potential? And the answer is because it's not just about those players. It's also about the environment they create for the players around them. And with the Rockets, everything starts with those blue chip talents. Certainly Jalen and Jabari, and to a lesser extent right behind them, Alperen Sengun and Kevin Porter Jr. Whether those guys develop and giving them the best chance to succeed, that is much more important than a KJ Martin or Tari Eason. Those guys are sort of like lottery tickets. If they hit, great, but the future of your franchise does not depend on them. The future of your franchise, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, does depend on getting the most out of guys like Jalen, Jabari, Sengun, KPJ. Those are much more important in the grand scheme. And if you need the floor space for them to have the best chance to succeed by playing a guy like Eric Gordon or Garrison Matthews, then that's what you're going to do, even if a guy like KJ or Tari has more upside individually. That's what a lot of fans don't seem to get. And so just as we talk about Gordon versus Tate, it's much the same dynamic when we talk about Garrison Matthews versus KJ and Tari. Now, we should note KJ shot 36% on threes last year, which is solid, but it's not great, and it was lower volume, and there's some people that question whether that's really sustainable because they don't like his form. To this point, it has held up. He's 36% as a rookie as well, but just saying that the questions are out there. So it's much the same question off the bench. Can you get enough floor spacing with the more high upside guys for those to be workable? Because if you can't, I think you'll see the Rockets default to the shooters, because that gives a better chance for the true blue chip guys, Jalen, Sengun, Jabari, KPJ, to have the best chance to succeed. And I think it's sort of similar in that I think in a perfect world, the Rockets would start Tate over Eric Gordon. And I think in a perfect world, you play a guy like KJ Martin and or Tari Eason, even as a rookie, more than Garrison Matthews, because they have more long-term potential. There's a better shot that 5 years from now, we're talking about KJ or Tari as an impact NBA player than Garrison Matthews. That's just the reality. However, the Rockets, when we consider that the odds are pretty small no matter what, there is a reason why KJ Martin fell to 52 in the second round. Tari Eason, a middle of the pack first round prospect this year. They're not the type of prospects that you say, no matter what, we're going to play them just because. No, there are bigger priorities on this team. And if Eric Gordon and Garrison Matthews, those types, are better for those guys, then they're going to err on the side of the known quantities, the shooting, which provide the floor spacing and the balance that you need. Now, if it's close, if there's a tie, then yeah, I think the Rockets might err on the side of upside with starting Tate and with giving a nod to a KJ or Tari, probably KJ first because he's in year 3. Tari will be a rookie. I think if it's close, yeah, in a rebuilding season that's about development, they'll go with the young guy. But if it's not close, even if they view that player as better individually or having more long-term upside, they're going to do what's right for the unit. And when I say the unit, I don't just mean maximizing wins this season. A lot of people are going to say, well, what does it really matter? You're not looking to be a playoff team this year. No, it's about maximizing the potential of the guys that really, truly matter to develop in the right way. And so that's where it's going to be close. And while I think it's not something that you're going to find a firm answer to in the first couple of weeks of training camp in the preseason, you can at least get some clues. What happens in those lineups with multiple non-shooters, or at least not non-shooters. Let's not act like KJ and Tari Eason and Jae'Sean Tate are completely hopeless, but non-volume shooters. Can you operate with at least 2 spots on the floor occupied by guys that are not capable of hitting threes at high volume, or at least have not done it yet? Can you look at least somewhat functionally offensively? If so, I think the Rockets would love to err on the side of giving more minutes to their prospects. But if not, then all of a sudden you may have to, in the short term, play one of those more veteran types to give you a better shot at developing your younger guys. That's a piece of the puzzle that I'm not going to be able to conclusively tell by the preseason, but you can at least see whether it has a chance to work early in the year. And I think Stephen Silas is going to be looking at that as well. Finally, last point, and this is right up there with KPJ as perhaps the biggest, Stephen Silas. We've talked about this all offseason. This is year 3 of his 4-year contract, and the 4th year isn't even fully guaranteed. Even if it was, you rarely see lame duck coaches in the NBA. Teams typically commit or they start looking for the next guy, especially if they're in a young and rebuilding phase like the Rockets. If he's not the guy, then the Rockets after this season are probably going to have a coaching search and look for the guy that they do hope can take them to the next level. Because as we mentioned earlier, starting next season, they are going to be trying to win. Prepare yourselves. And to this point, it's not fair to really judge Stephen Silas because the circumstances of the job changed dramatically from when he was hired in October 2020. James Harden and Russell Westbrook forced their way out, and all of a sudden this became a rebuilding team, one of the youngest in the NBA. But the Rockets do, even in these circumstances, have to make a judgment as to whether he's the guy. And a lot of people look at this the wrong way. People will say, well, why would you fire Stephen Silas? He hasn't had a fair shot. This is the thing. It's not about Stephen Silas doing something worthy of firing. It's about whether he does something that makes you believe that he is the guy that can eventually lead you to a title. If you don't believe that, then it behooves you to start looking for the guy that you believe who can be that guy. And the Rockets aren't going to measure him by wins and losses. They know how dramatically this job and the composition of the roster has changed, but you do want to see something that builds confidence. And in my opinion, when we look at Stephen Silas for this coming season, which again, it's year 3, the last prior to what would be his lame duck year that isn't even fully guaranteed. So this is the big year. I think what you want to see above all else is structure. One advantage the Rockets have, they are very young. The Rockets actually had a lot fewer changes than most other NBA teams this offseason. That sounds weird to say, but it's true. This is largely the same group, Christian Wood excluded, that we saw in April. They've been in the gym together all offseason. We heard when last year ended, Stephen Silas talked about the playbook being fairly vanilla because they didn't want to put too much too soon on those young guys, especially because a guy like Jalen, it's a little different than Jabari, who's a wing, with Jalen being a backcourt player and KPJ his first year as a point guard. They operate a lot more with the ball in their hands. And Stephen Silas talked about wanting to keep it more vanilla, not to put too much on them too soon. And the backcourt guys are sort of the guys who start your offense. Well, now KPJ, Jalen, Josh Christopher, all those guys have at least 1 year of experience in your system. In KPJ's case, 2. He said that year as a full-time point guard as well. You want to see the offense have more layers to it. You want to see more structure where they know what they're doing and they aren't just sort of going your turn, my turn, and freestyling from time to time, just looking for the first isolation that they can find. You want to see some structure. Defensively, you want to see them communicating. You want to see them working as a unit. You want to see players bought in. We talked earlier about Sengun as a hub and the blend of KPJ, Jalen, and Sengun together, and all of them having to sacrifice a little bit. You want to see that they're bought in when things go poorly. You don't have incidents like New Year's Day last year when, it started with Christian Wood and escalated at halftime with KPJ leaving the arena. You want to feel like that there's an adult in the room, that things are under more control than the way they looked a year ago. I'm not going to put all of that on Stephen Silas, even though he's the coach. I do think the team was insanely young, and not just young, but especially young in the backcourt. And so I do buy the idea that the playbook was artificially held back because so much of a year ago was about just getting these guys used to the rigors of an NBA lifestyle of being a professional. But now these guys have all had at least 1 year in the NBA. Most of them have had a year in the Stephen Silas system. There's a ton of continuity, more than most other teams. It's crazy to say, even though the Rockets are young in the preseason, the Rockets are actually going to should have more togetherness than a lot of the other teams. They're going to be integrating new parts because we know how crazy the NBA offseason can be. You want to feel above all else that Stephen Silas has control, that these players respect him, that they are learning, that they are getting better from 1 week to the next, not just as individuals, but as a unit. Clearly last year there was development on an individual level. I think Stephen Silas deserves a lot of credit for that. We saw Jalen finish the year much stronger than he began, and that's important. But honestly, it would be alarming if he didn't. Young players should improve individually. When it comes to what the Rockets ultimately want to do, building a sustainable contender, it comes down to not just the individual players developing as they get more experience, but the team collectively as a unit, maximizing the synergies they have as a group and playing together. We didn't see that a lot last year. Guess what? This year, a lot of those excuses are gone. A lot of people question Christian Wood as a leader and whether he truly bought into the team concept. He's not there anymore. Your starting lineup is very young, impressionable guys that Stephen Silas should be able to mold. Most of the lineup, other than those rookies, and Jabari is the only one that's going to be guaranteed to be in the rotation from day one, most of them were with the Rockets a year ago. They have more of a continuity advantage than most other teams. The backcourt in particular, that's why I can buy the scenario that they were vanilla intentionally a year ago. Well, now they have the experience. And with KPJ in year 4, you really need to see what you have in him. Is he the guy? If not, maybe point guard's position you look at with all your cap room next summer. It all starts with Stephen Silas having more control and more structure than what was shown a year ago. I don't think it's fair at this time to blame him for what happened last season. However, I do think it's fair to say that if Stephen Silas is the guy, you should see more signs of that in the coming season, a certain togetherness. What does that mean in terms of stats? Surely you want to see some growth in terms of offensive and defensive rating. You want to see a few more wins. You don't want to be last in the NBA again. You don't want to be 20-62. But I think in terms of what you can see in training camp in the preseason, are these guys bought in collectively, not just for themselves and their statistics, but are they together? Are they trying new things? Are they bought in on the team concept? Are they communicating? Are they looking out for the next guy? And in terms of X's and O's, are they buying into the idea that they need to try more and open up more layers to the playbook? Because even if Stephen opens the playbook, look, young guys are going to say, hey, especially in exhibition games, let me go out and get mine. Let me go out and beat my guy off the dribble and showcase my athleticism. And there's times for that, sure. But to get to where they want to go, you do need more diversity. You do need more layers. Are they buying into that? That's something that the results may not be there because it's going to be very different than a year ago. But you should begin to see training camp and the preseason. Is there more structure than there was a year ago? Are these guys buying in? I do think it's fair, especially when you consider the contract situation, that the coaching contract situation, that is, to hold Stephen Silas to that standard. And I also think just as the team is certainly going to undergo some changes next offseason with all the cap room, that also makes it all the easier to bring in a new coach because you're going to be going through some changes anyway. It's really not that hard to bring in a new coach if Stephen Silas isn't the guy. So while I don't think it's fair to blame Stephen Silas for the records of the past 2 seasons being worse than the NBA, I do think that you can and should expect him to get better in a lot of areas this coming season. It is fair to hold him to a higher standard, at least in terms of the intangibles, in terms of the work ethic, in terms of the togetherness. I don't know that that's going to manifest itself in a lot more wins for the group, but I do think that from day one, you should see a collective unit more than you did a year ago. I think that's the starting point for Stephen Silas. This is a year that, fair or unfair, he's going to need, the Rockets going to need to form an evaluation of him. And you can start to see some of this in the preseason, especially for a group that, as Stephen and Rafael have told us all off season, has been together in the gym all off season. That should present itself on the court as a team that's together, that knows what the other guy wants to do, where his spots are. That should be a team that communicates well defensively, that talks, that does all the little things. That's something that they're not going to be in peak form on Sunday, October 2nd, the preseason opener, but you can see some of it for sure, or you should see. And in a big year for Stephen Silas, I think you can start to see some of those things. You can't form a definitive judgment, but you can start to see some of the variables that are going to determine his future. You should start to see some of them playing out in the preseason. With that, I will bring this episode to a close. If you stuck with me for the full hour, I appreciate it. Apologies for going on, but well, number one, this is a very interesting year for this team. And two, as many of you know from following me on Twitter at Ben DuBose, I can be very long-winded. With that, I will bring this Ben-centric episode to a close. Again, in the future, we'll be much more interview-based as we have been in the past. But with this being the last week of the offseason, it's a bit slow. A lot of guys are on vacations and whatnot. Their last time to really be away from the NBA product for 7 months. So we'll get back to our usual format once training camp and media day gets here next week. This is just my preliminary look for some of the true diehards, those of you that aren't dialed in fully to the Astros, the Texans, or any other sport that's going on right now, those true basketball junkies that want to talk about what you should be looking for next week when we interview these guys and see them on the practice court, and then the following week on the exhibition floor. This episode is for you, the true diehards. What should you be looking for in training camp and the preseason? With that, I'll bring it to a close. Again, my name is Ben DuBose. Thanks as always for listening. Best place to get more information from me is on Twitter. I'm on there at Ben DuBose, the Rockets Wire. That's the blog for USA Today covering your Houston Rockets. The Twitter handle is the Rockets Wire, and the website rocketswire.usatoday.com. sports790.com for all sorts of daily coverage. Also check out sports790.com, which is the website for Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the Rockets and a partner of this podcast. And also our friends at Karbach Brewing. This is the Lager Line, which is brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. That's the beer, Clutch City Lager, brought to you courtesy of the Rockets and Karbach, and you can learn more about them at karbachbrewing.com. With those plugs out of the way, I will sign off. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another episode of The Lager Line.